Welcome to Insanity Fair. Today I'd like to talk about competitive consumerism from the point of view of human instinct. Now, animals have instincts, and there's nothing you can do to get rid of them. You can train the animals, of course, but that's not to remove their instincts, that's just to channel them. So, a dog will have an instinct to chase a rabbit. If it's very disciplined, then it might not actually move unless you allow it to, but it still has the instinct. Now, when it comes to human beings, culture, society, is a very powerful force in modelling and changing behaviour. So that if you take the same child and you bring it up in different cultures, it will obviously grow up with different behaviours. But its basic human instincts are going to remain the same. Maybe there are some different instincts in different physical locations. It may be that people who live in very hot countries, or people who live at very high altitudes, or people who live, say, at the North Pole, might have evolved some special instincts to deal with those conditions. But there isn't much evidence for this as far as I can see. It seems to me that people everywhere have very similar instincts. Now, let's take an example of that. Let's take the reaction to fighting among boys, among men. If a fight starts among children in a playground, the other boys will form a ring around the two boys who are fighting, and they might take sides, but basically they will watch and they will get a sort of vicarious pleasure as watching these two boys fight. And you can see the same instinct all over the world in various forms of organised fighting. Boxing, for example, or Thai kickboxing, whatever kind of contest it might be, various kinds of Chinese martial arts, judo. And in a commercial setting, this might be changed in rather a peculiar way. One of the most commercially successful forms of that kind of entertainment is this style of wrestling, where it's been turned completely into a showbiz spectacle, where all fights are fixed, where there are the most ridiculous and extreme theatrical elements to it, with strange costumes and completely unbelievable developments happening during the fight. People still like that. So you can see that this basic instinct of having an instinct, being attracted to watching people fight, which is maybe a defensive instinct, actually, to keep an eye on it, to make sure that you're not going to get sucked into it, and to stay quite close to it so that you know what's going on. This is transformed into this into being an audience for this commercial show with this grossly distorted form of fighting, which is not really fighting at all anymore. The same thing goes obviously for all of the film version of that, where the people fighting might not actually be fighters at all, but just actors who have been trained to simulate fighting. Now, that, I would say, is something which we see on a huge scale, that commercialisation of instinct. Another example of that would be the fashion industry. Now, the fashion industry is obviously a very complex thing, but there are some aspects of the way that people dress, men and women, that are maybe not determined, maybe that's too strong, but which have a strong element of instinctive responses. There's a rather neat example of that in a study of high heels. This was a university study, and they took girls, university students, I imagine, and they sent them to stop men in the street and ask them survey questions. And so the same girls did this wearing flat shoes, and they recorded the number of men who stopped to answer the questions, and then they put 2-inch heels on, and they recorded the number of men who stopped, and then 4-inch heels, and they recorded the number of men who stopped. And you already know the answer, that more men stopped with the 2-inch heels, and still more stopped with the 4-inch heels than with the flat shoes. And the explanation for this is that high heels make women appear more vulnerable because they can't walk properly, and so men develop an urge to go and protect them. And so the fashion industry takes what is initially a purely instinctive response and turns it into a way to make money, and sells it to the customers in terms of beauty and elegance and, well, being fashionable. There are lots of other examples: short skirts, low cut. Oh, I'm wearing one. Low cut tops for women. For men, clothes that show off their muscles. I'm sure that all sorts of particular kinds of clothing and accessory have some kind of instinctive element to them. It provokes some kind of instinctive response. But the thing is that these are all mass phenomena, and if you want to have something which is going to really evoke that mass response, that almost universal response in society, then I think you have to have something that has an instinctive element to it. In politics, I think there's an instinctive need to feel that you have a leader or you have leaders, and that you're going to pay some attention to what they're doing, even if it's completely passive. You know that they're up there. In Britain, we have the royal family that fulfills a very similar function. If you look at the international level, then that's even more marked, I think. Because there, the cultural differences are maybe not entirely removed, but they certainly cancel out, because there are wide differences in human cultures. And so, if you take football is nearly universal. It's only America really that is still resisting. Even there it exists, but it's seen as a girls' game. But people, in China, Korea, Japan, the whole of Africa, South America, that they all go wild for football, because it's a spectacle which you don't need to be taught to appreciate. You can instinctively follow it like a fight. and you have a response to it, which it's quite easy to channel. And so you have whole huge crowds of people physically, and also, millions of people watching on television or the internet, or listening on the radio even, and they're all able to tune in instinctively. Now, when it comes to competitive consumerism, what I would suggest is that this conforms to some very basic human instincts. The main instinct is to be better than the person next to you, even if there's actually nothing much to distinguish you. Okay, you have your neighbour, the person in the next hut in your African village, and you're probably fairly closely related. You do exactly the same things. You're part of exactly the same economy or activity, but you want to be better. You want to show that you have some higher status. And so, how do you do that? Well, in low technology societies in Africa, in the Amazonian jungle, in Papua New Guinea, one way that you will do this is by personal adornment with feathers or paint or shells or whatever it might be, that you will spend a considerable amount of time and effort on trying to make yourself more beautiful, not through being actually physically more beautiful, because you have no control over that, but through adorning yourself. And women do this, of course. I think it tends to be done more by men, because in low technology societies, men often sit about most of the day, while the women are out hunting and gathering, and working collectively on looking after babies, on preparing food and so on. So men have more time to adorn themselves, particularly for special occasions, for some kind of ritual dance or some event. And I think that, in fact, this desire for adornment gets submerged as society advances, because when people go through the phase, say, of becoming workers, labourers, then they can't really do that so easily. It's they're wearing clothes which are mass-produced. They don't have any money or leisure to spend doing that. So what they do is they start to acquire status in different ways. And there are some ways of acquiring status which are, I think, more legitimate. No, I prefer them, I suppose. You can learn to be you can gain status by having some kind of skill, for example, by being able to produce furniture or make shoes or something like that. So the basic instinct for status is I think what's behind it. But once you begin to get commerce reaching into people's lives, then this particular kind of status becomes available, which is a return really to that low technology kind of society, and that is status through adornment. And this time I think it's women who probably lead the charge, because in industrial society women had more leisure time, I suppose you'd call it, and they'd be at home more often, particularly once they have children, and they'd buy clothes which were flattering for them, particularly younger women. And it's an instinct, it's an instinct for a young woman to want to be sexually attractive. Although Camille Paglia, the feminist intellectual, says that women actually dress up for other women and that men barely notice what women wear, which I think is rather true. But anyway, it's quite clear that young men and young women dress to impress, dress to be sexually attractive. And they do this mainly, well, increasingly, in fact, just by spending money, just by buying it. Not by spending hours and hours like an African woman, say, getting her friend or her sister or her cousin to spend 12 hours plaiting her hair in a particular way. Other women do that kind of thing, of course. But increasingly it's just a question of spending more money. When it comes to men, it's almost entirely just a question of spending more money. And that can be somebody saving up for 3 months to buy one pair of shoes, or it can be somebody who's extremely rich just casually buying a watch. I remember at the time of the millennium, there was a Swiss watch company that made a special case of watches. And there was one in red gold, one in white gold, and one in platinum. And you bought all of these three together for, I believe it was $1 million. And they were worried that they might have overstretched themselves. In fact, they couldn't sell enough of them, because there were people in the Middle East and in Hong Kong who would have bought as many as they could make, because it was such a fantastic status thing just to casually mention. And how long is anybody actually going to wear one watch that is for the millennium, let alone 3? Something with, no investment value. Anyway, basically we're all in the situation of those people watching the World Wrestling Federation fights, as far as this instinct for status is concerned. We've been sold a pup, as they say. The idea of wanting status is something that we can't escape from. Everybody wants it. Children, men, women. It's instinctive. But the idea that the way to get this is just through this incessant consumption, this mad attempt to buy our way to the top of the tree, is so destructive. It's destructive of the planet. It's destructive of the environment. It's destructive of all the other values in our society, because it's such a powerful element that it is tending to destroy everything else, as our societies become almost entirely consumption driven.